Hey guys, this is Tech Howdy. I welcome you to another video tutorial where we are building this CMS application using ASP.NET Core 3 and Angular 10. In the last video tutorial, we finished implementing the registration functionality for our client application, which is built using Angular 10. I showed you how to use reactive programming within your Angular registration form. I also showed you how to create services that can communicate with the backend API, and we did some error handling and display the errors in our registration form as well as on the modal pop-up. In this video tutorial, we are going to fix the loading of our login form when we go to the login component, we have certain errors that are displayed on the console. We will fix these errors and we will implement the login functionality in our application. A login functionality includes many features like the two-factor authentication. It includes token refreshing, generating JWT tokens, decrypting them, and so on. We will need to build certain endpoints in our account controller that we build in the version 1 of our API. We are going to extend that account controller with more methods or more endpoints, and we'll consume those endpoints in our Angular application. So before we go ahead and fix this login component, let's go ahead and first create the endpoint that we need when the user submits the login form. Once we have completed building the backend code, we will jump onto the front-end code and we will use the backend API in the front-end code. So let's go ahead and fix and code the application. So here in the account controller class from the API endpoint, we are going to add another method called as the auth method. The auth method will be of type HTTP post and we will pass in a token request model. In the model service, we are going to go ahead and create this token request model class with the following properties. Here we will provide the grant type, the username, the refresh token, the password, and the remember me flag, where in case if the user selects the option remember me while submitting the form, then we can extend the expiry of the token based on this selection. And all these properties, when we use it, I will explain how and where we are going to use it when we use it in the code. Now let's go back to the account controller. Here in the auth method from the Angular application, when we call this method, we are going to pass all these details in an object called as token request model, and we are going to attach that object to the body of the HTTP request. Therefore, I have used the attribute from body over here while passing this object. Now we will go ahead and implement some logic within this auth method so that we can authenticate and create a authentication token for our users. So the next step is to instantiate another object which is of type auth service. So we would need a instance of our auth service or authentication service that we have created. So we'll go ahead and instantiate using dependency injection. And here inside the method, first thing we will try to validate if this token request model is valid. And if it's not, then we return a bad request as the HTTP response. While if the model is valid, the next thing that we do is we use a try catch block, and if there are any exceptions, we can log that exception in our log file. And if anything goes wrong during this validation process, then we can return an unauthorized response, which is 404 back to the HTTP request. Now within this try block, we are going to write our logic that we need to validate the user credential and provide the authentication token. So here I've created a variable called as JWT token, and in the authentication service I'm calling the auth method and passing this token request model to that auth method so that it can validate the details and return a JWT token. So all the validation will be done inside the authentication service, not in the API endpoint. And the reason to do it is so that we can have the method stored inside the authentication service. And in case we want to create another endpoints like version 2, version 3, then we don't have to write the code again. we can just call the auth method in another versions, and we will save time by not writing those lines of code once again. So here, if we go to the authentication service that we had created, in the authentication service, we have an auth method which was created for authenticating the admin credentials. Here in the auth method, we are passing the login view model, whereas in the account controller here for the API, we are passing the token request model. Therefore, here we are going to create another extension method, or we can also call it as method overload, where we will create another method with the same name, but the parameter type would be different. So let's go ahead and add this method over here. So here we have added a new method with the same name but with different parameter type called as token request model. Here I have added a comment so that you know that this particular method is used for the Angular app or our REST API app, any other apps that we build, so that we can use it in the API endpoint call. Whereas this method here belongs to the admin authentication. Since we have added this method here so that we can consume it in our controller class, we will have to add it to the interface. So let's go ahead and add it over here. Once we add this method to the interface, we should not see any errors over here. Now we can access this method. Now inside this method, we have to write our logic and all the extensions methods that we need. We will create them in this authentication service class or the auth service class that we have over here. So here inside the auth method, we just have few lines of code which we would need. First, we are going to validate our model once again. If the model is null or for some reason there are some errors in the model, we are going to validate it here as well. And we are going to return a generic 500 response. Therefore, we are going to use our same extension method that we had created for our admin panel. If you remember, it's called as create error response token. And this create error response token returns a token response model. So here we just have to pass in the HTTP status code that we need to create a response token for and the message. So that's what we are doing over here. If the model is null, we are going to return this error response. But if the model is valid, then we are going to run a switch case where we are going to check if the model dot grant type, if it's password, then we are going to generate a new token, which means the user is logging in for the first time and they are providing us their password. If the model.grant type is refresh token, means that the user had already logged in and is trying to access a authorized page, but their current token is expired, and therefore we would need to refresh that token or refresh the authentication token. Therefore, we are going to call the refresh token method. These two methods, we have not yet created them. We are going to create them. If you notice, we have a generate token method, but once again, this method, we are passing in the application user and the login view model, which basically means that we cannot use this method for our API endpoint authentication requests. We are going to create another method overload or extension method with the same name, but different parameter type, which will be the model in our case, which is token request model. So let's go ahead and create these two methods that we need so that we can use it and authenticate our incoming requests. So I've added these two methods or two extension methods over here. For the generate new token method, I have created an extension or a method overload with a different parameter called as token request model, where we are passing the same model that we received to the generate new token method. Whereas for the refresh token, we have a new method or new extension method created. In the admin panel, we are not refreshing the admin tokens. Therefore, I had not created any refresh token functionality. Whereas the client-side application, we will be refreshing tokens. And for that, we have a refresh token method. Let's start working on the generate new token method. If a user provides their password, then we will generate a new token. So first thing that I would do in this particular method is create a try catch block, and if there are any errors, we will log those errors. And after logging those errors, we will go ahead and create a response token or error response token, and we will pass in the HTTP code as internal server error. because we had some exceptions while processing this particular request, and we catch those exceptions and then return a internal server error back to the response or back to the client. Here in the try block, first thing that we want to do is we want to find the user by their username. Since we are going to receive the username in the token request model, we are going to take that username and try to find the user using our user manager class, which is part of ASP.NET Core Identity. We have already instantiated that in the controller, in the constructor, while we were working on the admin authentication. So we will use the same user manager class and call the find by name async method to get the user. So here I have implemented the logic that is required to generate a new token. So first thing, as I mentioned, we will use the user manager class and we will try to find the user by their username that is provided in the login form. If we are not able to find the user, which means the user is null, so in that case, if the user is null, we are going to return a error response token with unauthorized code back to the client. We will say that it's an invalid username or password in the message, and we will return the 404 unauthorized response. But if the user is not null, which means we found a user with the specific username, then we will validate the credentials further. Here, first thing that we want to check, if we find a user with this username that is provided in the token request model, we will try to match the password that is provided in the model. If the password is valid and if the user is not null, and finally we will check if the user role is not administrator. I have added this additional flag because I don't want the administrator to log in from the client-side application. In this case, the client-side application will then create a cookie for the user, and I don't want any admin cookie to be stored in the client-side application validation. If you want the administrator role users to log in the client application, then you can remove this particular flag from your of particular check or this additional condition from this if method or if condition. Since I don't want the administrator user role users to log in from the client app, I have set this additional flag over here. Next thing, if these checks pass, then we move on to the next step where we check if the user account is locked. Previously, if the user tried to log in multiple times with failed invalid username and password, or there can be multiple reasons for which the user account was locked, then we are going to check if the user account is locked. Our application user, which is part of ASP.NET Core Identity user, has a flag or has a property associated with it called as lockout enabled. It's a Boolean property. So we are going to check if this lockout enabled properties value is true, and if it is true, then again we will create an error response with unauthorized status code, and this time we will set the message as account locked. For all the messages that you see in this create error response token, you can change them based on your requirement and based on how you want to present it. So for me, I have set it as account lock because it makes more sense since the lockout is enabled. So if the user account is not locked, then we move on to the next step where we check if the user has confirmed their email. In our application, when users register, we make sure that when they register and when they're trying to log in for the first time, we always make sure that they have verified their email. So we are checking here if their email is confirmed. If they have not yet confirmed their email, then we will return an error response saying that the email is not confirmed, and the status code once again is 401 unauthorized. Sorry. Next thing, if this validation passes, then we go on to the next step where we create and return the access token, which will contain the JWT token and also the refresh token for refreshing the user's JWT. So if the user has checked off the option remember me, then in the model remember me, we will assign that value from the model to this object over here, property, which is remember me. Here we are going to create a variable called as access token, which will store the token that we create for the user. To create a JWT token for this user who's trying to log in, we are going to add an additional extension method over here called as create access token. Since I don't want to make this method lengthy, I decided to add an access token. Also, adding an access token like this create access token method, I can use this method in other functions that I create over here within this particular auth service. So I don't have to write this access token code multiple times. So let's go ahead and create this additional extension method that we are going to use called as create access token, since the user's validation checks have passed, and now we want to create a access token for our application user, which we are passing as parameter to this method. So let's go ahead and create this method. So here I have created the create access token method, which we are going to call when we generate the token for the user when they are logging in. Here in the first step, what we would try to do is first create the token expiry time and the refresh token expiry time. We always need to set an expiry time for our tokens. In the app settings.json file of our project, here under the app settings section, you would notice that we have two values, which is expired time and refresh token expire time. We have used these values previously in the admin panel when we are setting the authentication, but we have not used the refresh token expiry time. Here in the auth service, while we are creating the access token for our client app users, we are going to create refresh tokens. So therefore, we are going to use the refresh token expiry time. In the app settings.json file, I have set the expiry time to 60 minutes and the refresh token expiry time to 120 minutes, which is basically 2 hours. So if I go back to the auth service, first thing I do is I get the values from my app settings file using the app settings service that I have over here instantiated in the constructor of this auth service using dependency injection. Once I have the app settings file values, the next thing that I do is I need to know if the user has checked off the option remember me. While we are going to call the create access token method, before calling the method, we assigned the value of the remember me a boolean property to the application users dot remember me property. So here we are going to check if the user wants us to remember their login, so that they want us to keep their token uh, extended expiry, or have their tokens to be stored in the browser with extended expiry. So here if the user selected to remember them from logging in, then we will extend the token expiry from 60 minutes to 1 day, and in 1 day we will have this many minutes, and the refresh token expiry we will extend it from 2 hours, so 1 day and 2 hours. So I've just extended it from 2 more hours. Remember that your refresh token will always expire after your primary token, because we would need the refresh token to remain valid in order to refresh the expired primary token. Now here we are going to check if the two-factor authentication is enabled for the user, and if the two-factor authentication is enabled, that means first we need to validate the user's two-factor code before we expand or extend this expiry time. Therefore, here we are checking if user's two-factor token is enabled, then the token expiry time from this 1440 or from 60 minutes, we are going to reset it to 1 minute, and we are going to extend this expiry time to 5 more minutes. And the reason to do that is, if you have watched the extended demo in the Angular app, I have posted it, you would notice that I have a session timer when the code is sent to the user. That session timer is basically valid for this 5 minutes that I have set over here. That's because once we send the code to the user, we want them to use that code within 5 minutes of we sending them those code. If they try to use that code, let's say after 10 minutes or 24 hours, that code is expired and they should not be able to use it. Therefore, I have set this 5-minute timer over here on the token so that I can use it in the session expiry when I am requesting the two-factor code. Here for the refresh token expiry time, I'm going to reset it back to the value as the token expiry time, which is 5 minutes. And I have specified the reason over here. That's because once they have validated the code, then I can extend the expiry time. Next step, what we do over here is we generate a key for encoding or for signing our token or our JWT token. This key is stored in the app settings under the app settings called as secret. As I mentioned when we created the admin authentication, I have used keys which are readable. In general, people don't use keys like this. Keys should be something which is alphanumeric, cannot be read by anyone. So make sure when you are deploying your application, you use some sensible strings that don't make sense and cannot be easily cracked. And if you wish to, you can also store your client secrets in Azure Vault or some other services that you wish to use. But in this particular project, we are using the app settings file. Going back to the auth service, once we have received the key, then we will get the role of the user using the user manager's get role async method. Then we will have the token handler object created because we need to create JWT token. We have already installed this libraries when we worked on the admin panel. So if you haven't watched those video tutorial, I recommend you to watch it. Here, then we want to create a token descriptor object because we need to describe our token, what values we are going to store in this encrypted JWT token. We are going to describe those values over here. Here for the expiry time of the token, I have set it to the token expiry time object that we have created over here in the first step, and then we have modified the values of this token expiry time accordingly based on different scenarios. So the same token expiry time, we are going to assign it to the JWT token expiry. Within the claims, as you can see, we have used the same claims that we use within the admin authentication. So there's not much difference over here. Next step is to generate the token. We go ahead and create an key for our second layer of encryption. So our token, as we know, we are going to store it in the cookie using the JWT signing key. After we have encrypted that token, we are going to store it in the cookie. We in this application have implemented 2 layers of protection on the cookies that we store in the browser. So to encrypt the JWT token and the refresh token in the second layer, I'm going to create a unique key using the GUID class, and I'm going to use this unique key to create a data protector instance. Over here, as you can see, I have created a protector instance using the key for encryption key JWT that I created using the GUID. So using this particular string that will be generated, I've used that string as a key and created a protector instance using the Microsoft's iData Protection Provider class. Now the next thing is I'm going to go ahead and create the JWT token using the token handlers create token method. The token handler is the class that we have instantiated over here. So the token handler has a method called as create token, and we need to pass a security token descriptor object which we have passed over here, which describes our token. Once we call the create token method on the described object that we pass, the token will be created. Now this particular token, we are going to encrypt it as we are implementing 2 layers of protection. So the second layer of protection, we are going to protect it using the protector we created from this GUID key, and we are going to protect that token. Next step, we create and update the token table. Once the token is created, we need to update our token table. In our database, we have a table for storing the tokens. So we are going to update that token table with all the information that we have generated which is regarding this particular token. So next thing, we create a refresh token instance. We have a method called as create refresh token over here. We are using the same method. All this method does is it creates a token model object and it returns it back. Nothing specific about this method. Only thing that you will notice that the encryption key value and the JWT encryption key value is an empty string because we have not yet assigned it. So we will call this method, which will return us a token model object. After it returns us the object, then we will assign the JWT key and the uh, refresh token key that we need to decrypt these tokens. So as you know, we have created these keys over here using the GUID class. So we're going to assign these values to the object property over here so that we can store it in our database. Finally, what we are going to do is we are going to add this token to our database along with the decryption key for JWT and decryption key for the refresh token. First thing before we add the tokens to the database is we will check if there are any old tokens for that existing users existing in the database. If there are any old tokens for that specific user, we will go ahead and delete the tokens, invalidate them, delete them, and then we will add the new tokens. So we don't want to add multiple tokens for the same user in our database. So we will first delete it so we have enough space in our database. Finally, after we have saved the changes to our database and we have added the token to the token table, we will go ahead and return the token back to our client. So for that, here you will see while returning the response, we had not yet encrypted the refresh token. We have already encrypted the uh, other token, that is the JWT, but we have not yet encrypted the refresh token. So here I have created a layer 1 protector instance using the application user key. If we go to app settings, here we have a data protection property which contains the key that we use to encrypt user tokens. Using this key, we are going to add another layer of protection. So here we create a new protector instance using that specific key, and then we will protect that token, that's our JWT token, as well as we will protect our refresh token. Now the next thing that we would want to do is return this response back to our user. But before returning it back to the user, we have to set the cookies in the browser. Therefore, using the cookie service, I have set the following cookies in the browser. From the access token, we can access the value of the token. From the access token, we can access the value of the refresh token. Even though these values are encrypted, we can still access them and set them in the browser of the user. And for the expiry time of the cookies, we have used the token refresh expiry time over here, the object that I have created. And since for the expiry time I need to set it in minutes, so the cookies that we set in the browser, we need to specify the expiry time in minutes. I have calculated the expiry time based on the refresh token and expiry of the access token expiry time. So we have the subtract method. Using the subtract method, I have used the current time using datetime UTC and tried to get the minutes. You can use datetime.now, but I have used datetime.utc. Based on your requirement, you can change this object. So we have now created the token, set the cookies, and I'm going to return back the access token to our method, which we used over here called as generate new token. So this token will now be returned back to the user. So the next method that we want to go ahead and work on is the refresh token method, which we need to create in order when the user's JWT token expires but the refresh token is still valid, and we need to refresh that JWT token we are going to use this refresh token method. So in the next video tutorial, we will work on this refresh token method, and then we will go ahead and test our functionality after we have created the login component and fix the errors. For the source code, everything will be provided in our DevOps repos. You can go ahead and get the link in the video description. If you have any questions, use the comment section and we will be happy to answer those questions. Please do not forget to like and subscribe our channel Tech Howdy. Thank you.